everyone. It's 1:15, so we are going to get this session started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session. It is Transition Know Your Rights. My name is Denise Lugo-Fowler, and I am the Director of Training and Outreach for Disability Rights New Jersey, and I'm thrilled to be your host today. I will be monitoring the chat box and supporting our speakers throughout this session. Just a couple housekeeping tips or items before we start the panel. Please keep your microphones on mute and turn off your videos. That's only to keep us from limiting the background noises and other distractions. Not that we don't want to see your faces or hear from you. We just want to limit the distractions right now. Also, that we have captions available, and if you need them, they are the buttons across the bottom of the Zoom menu bar. You will see CC live transcript. Just click on that button and you'll have the transcript available for you. Also, we have an ASL interpreter in this session. And if you experience any technical issues, please throw a message up in the chat box and hopefully I can address the issue and resolve it. So that covers all our housekeeping items. So please join us in welcoming our panelists today, Susan Head, who is a senior staff advocate, and Robert Robinson, who is a senior staff attorney for Disability Rights New Jersey. And with that, I turn it over to them.
I thought I wasn't going to need an introduction, but anyhow, I'm only joking. Thank you, Denise, for that introduction. You do have a PowerPoint as well, right?
I'm bringing it up right now.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Can you go to the next slide, please?
Click the button. Here we go.
Okay. Technical issues, please stand by. Okay. This is a synopsis of what we will be covering today and discussing. You can see it on your screen. You could read it right there. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Okay, thank you. Thank you again, Denise, for the introductions. I'm going to cover some issues with transition services. It's a very important part of special education. Individuals with Disability Education Act is known as IDEA. That was established back in 1990. At that time, there was no transition services required when that act was established. So obviously today, transition services are required. And why do you think they had to add that? Because from 1975 until about 1990, they did some studies of what was happening to students with disabilities once they graduated from high school. So they did some research, and what they came up with was a lot of those students were not doing a whole lot of anything. They were just sitting at home, watching TV, playing games. They had no job prospects. So they were trying to figure out why that happened. They didn't have a basic idea of daily life skills. They didn't know how to cook. They couldn't drive a car. They didn't know how to manage their own finances. They didn't know how to use public transportation. They didn't have, job skills. They didn't have any type of training, maybe in any kind of vocational field. They did not have that background. So they realized that IDA focused a lot on the academics of school, but not enough on preparing them for life after high school. So that's why they decided to add this component of transition services. And I have some examples of possible transition services. Students may need to take some type of preparatory courses to get them ready for college. They might need some more structured learning in specific environments. You need to give students opportunities to go to different work environments off campus. Maybe they can experience working in a drugstore, clothing store, packaging things, getting things ready for the shelf. If you notice my cup, Wawa. This morning when I went to Wawa to get my coffee, I know that the person who served me the coffee had a disability herself. And how did she get that job? She started out through her structured learning experience while she was in high school and has continued that employment there. So that's good for her. She has a job. She's a productive member of society. She's not sitting at home watching TV. So it's really important to give these students structured experience, vocational training, like I said, maybe mechanical work or carpentry, whatever, I'm sure there's a lot of different vocational schools have a lot of different programs that they can offer and different skills that they could develop. They could work with a job coach to help them develop their interests. A life skills coach who could perhaps teach them how to cook, how to wash their clothes, how to do basic money management. So students who have more severe disabilities will need more help with those issues. And there's a wide, range of different needs because the students are also very different. Some are more severely disabled, and they'd have to have a more comprehensive approach, a more comprehensive plan, so they can transition to after high school. Next slide, please. So we also need to talk about the legal requirements for legal services. In New Jersey, we start at about 14 years of age to discern whether or not, to discern what services to provide them. At that age, it's more information gathering. We can ask them or invite the students to their IEP meetings. And at those meetings, ask them, what are you looking for in your future? What type of jobs do you think you'd want to do? Do you want to try to go to college? And, we may need to do some assessments to see what those students' interests really, where they lie. It's important to be in contact with outside agencies who will also have an important role in the student's future once they graduate. For instance, DVRS, Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services. And I'll let Susan speak to those issues. When a student becomes 16 or a little younger, that's when it's really important to get transition services kicked in or started. Because that's when, they should really start thinking about what their vocation will be. We have to look at their disabilities. If they have a lot of significant cognitive disabilities, we may have to focus more on life skills. But it's important to set up those goals with transition services and put that in that student's IEP. For example, maybe to have the goal by the end of the year to have the student obtain their driver's license. Another goal could be that they can get the vocational skills certificate. Whatever grade or whatever that student is interested in, make sure that's part of the IEP. 16, I feel, is a really critical age that we really need to get, going on their future. Next slide, please. Right now, the Office of Administrative Law, OAL, they tend to hear these types of cases, and they're overwhelmed with lawsuits involving special education. There's quite a bit of litigation going on. And there are a lot of common issues that I see with that litigation. Transition services is one of them. Once COVID hit, it had a real impact on students' ability to get an appropriate education and to get appropriate services. For example, structured learning experiences, many of those students were not able to go and experience those structured learning experiences because quite a few places were closed due to COVID. So they missed out on those opportunities to participate in the community and see what, and to get job experience. So that's a hot issue, a hot litigation topic. Students who are 21 and older, transition obviously is important because they're done with their academic part of their learning, but they haven't finished with their transition services. Okay, I think I've said quite a bit. I'm going to let Susan go ahead, and she could probably talk more about WIOA.
Thanks, Robert. Okay, so as Robert has just highlighted, the school district is responsible for providing comprehensive transition services to students with disabilities. In a few minutes, we're going to open up the discussion so everyone has an opportunity to participate and ask questions. Just briefly, for about 3 minutes, I want to mention a few points about transition services available from the state vocational rehabilitation agencies, especially for those who haven't seen the recorded webinar on our website called What Parents of Children with IDD Need to Know About Vocational Rehabilitation Transition Services. As some of you may know, in July 2014, an important piece of federal legislation was signed into law called the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA. As a result of this legislation, VR agencies are now required to participate in transition planning early, including making available a new set of services to students with disabilities called pre-employment transition services. Thank you. Next slide, please. So pre-employment transition services, there are 5 required pre-employment transition services, or pre-ETS, that VR agencies are responsible for providing in coordination with school districts. These services can be provided to all students with disabilities, regardless of whether they have applied for VR services, and can be provided individually or in groups, depending on the need of the individual student. Pre-employment transition services are intended to supplement and enhance, not replace, transition services provided by the school district. Next slide, please. As a result of WIOA, VR services can now be considered a continuum of services, potentially available when the student is 14, and not just at or after graduation. If a student requires more intensive employment preparation services and supports, the parents can apply for individualized VR transition services when the student reaches 14. In order to receive these services, these individualized VR transition services, DVRS will need to determine that the student meets eligibility criteria for VR services. So next slide, please. Here's an overview of the VR process from application. So when a student is determined eligible for VR services, the next step is developing an individualized plan for employment, or IPE, which is a written agreement between the individual and the VR agency about the services that will be provided. Next slide, please. And finally, here is the eligibility criteria for VR services, which is that the student must have a physical or mental impairment that constitutes or results in a substantial impediment to employment, and that the student requires VR services to prepare for, secure, retain, advance in, or regain employment. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Denise so we can start the roundtable discussion. Thank you.
Can I add something to what, if you don't mind, I'd like to add a few things. When people ask a question, please don't reveal your personal information, for instance, names of children. We'd like to keep things confidential. You can ask a generalized question. If you want to discuss a specific instance, we can talk afterwards. You can contact us directly for that. Okay.
So yes, I invite everyone to put questions in the chat, or they can unmute themselves and ask questions. Happy to address or share information as well.
I also would like to add, I have to emphasize that I am practicing in special education for almost 20 years now. I've been working in this field. And I've seen quite a few errors that people make over and over. One of the biggest errors, well, one situation that I saw where when students get very close to graduating, maybe a week or two before graduation, I asked if DVRS, if this child was a client of DVRS, and a lot of the parents are like, never heard of DVRS. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of signing up for DVRS services early, not waiting until close to graduation time. It's important to maintain contact with your DVRS counselor throughout the last few years of schooling. It's important to maintain a relationship with them so that when it's time to graduate, the counselor knows who you are and knows what you may need. They already have an established relationship with you, and they can better help you, prepare you for after graduation. So I just want to emphasize that for everyone out there, not to wait too long to get services.
Yeah, that is a really good point, And in the case, I'm just going to mention this, that in the case any parents participating in this roundtable decide to contact one of the VR agencies. So we're talking about the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services or the Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired. If when your child reaches 14, 15, 16, whenever you decide it would be appropriate for your child to be considered for vocational rehabilitation services, and you apply to the VR agency, if you are informed that it is too early for you to contact the VR agency, please note that we have clearly said here that once your child reaches 14, you can submit an application on your child's behalf. If your child is not determined eligible for services at Disability Rights New Jersey, we have a designated program called the Client Assistance Program, which is federally funded to assist individuals who are seeking VR services. So hopefully it won't be the case, but if you do apply for VR services for your child and your child is denied eligibility, which by the way, you should receive in a written notice, then please feel free to call our agency and let us know you're having this problem, and we will try and assist you.
That's a very good point, Susan. Thank you. I have it's a sad reality sometimes. Schools, again, I've looked at a lot of IEPs throughout the years. And I noticed that school districts, even though they have the primary responsibility to provide transition services, they like to put that responsibility of transition services onto the DVRS agencies. And they have like a little checklist on the IEP about who's responsible for providing what service. And I noticed that schools will often say DVRS, DVRS, DVRS. And I've seen that on quite a few IEPs. Really, the school districts have the primary responsibility for providing those services. So again, it's important to know that, who's responsible for what and not allow the school districts to push that responsibility onto DVR. I think you should get as much as you can from both agencies or from both places, the school district or DVRS. You shouldn't focus too much on one agency or rely too much on one agency. Because once you do that, then the other one says, oh, they've got it, they're taking care of it. So it's important that you have both of them work together to get your maximum benefit, to get your services from the school and from DVRS, because we want the child to get maximum, maximum punch from both agencies.
Hi, this is Lori Schaller from National Disability Institute. If I could just share some information too. So many of the Department of Labor offices have been trained in providing services to individuals who have disabilities. And a priority of service, of course, for youth would be that person who has a disability. And their services may work really well, particularly if that youth who has a disability has a strong community of youth who do not have a disability. They can participate in any training offered by Department of Labor, any youth employment initiative. And that might make that difference for youth, and Department of Labor offices do work very closely with DVRS, vocational rehabilitation offices. Thank you.
So we, sorry. So we'd love to hear from, anybody who has questions or would like to make a comment, because otherwise we have to keep talking. So in the absence of any questions, I did just want to make one point about the availability as a result of WIOA. After a student graduates, there is now the availability, the VR agencies can support advanced training and other post-secondary opportunities. Before WIOA, we often heard that the VR agencies felt that their responsibility was just to provide support and training for entry-level positions. But under WIOA, it is now very clear that if the student has the abilities and interests, the VR agency can sponsor that individual in terms of law, medicine, the STEM fields, etc. So all VR services that are provided, whether before graduation or after graduation, need to be provided based on that individual's abilities, interests, and strengths. And just one other point that I want to make is the concept of informed choice. That is a central component of how VR services should be provided. And just in a nutshell, informed choice means that the individual who is receiving the VR services should be in the driver's seat about decisions and choice of employment goal, choice of providers, etc. Clearly, they work with their VR counselor regarding the type of services that they will receive, but informed choice means that the individual recipient of VR services really should be in the driver's seat regarding choices that affect them.
Yep.
So I actually have a question that, as someone who's gone to a lot of events and have had parents and students come to our table and ask, and I want to, address this to Susan and Robert. So how does someone get started with the transition process? I've had parents come to the table and say, what are you talking about? So how do they even get started?
They should contact the school district and contact special services director and say that my child is 14 and I think we're ready to start transition services. The school district has an obligation to coordinate with parents and the students once they become the age of 14. Many times school districts, forget about that and they kind of just let things fall through the cracks. I've seen it happen quite a few times. It's important to write letters to the school district and request IEP meetings to discuss these things. Because they have up to They have up to 20 days to respond to anything that you send them in writing. So they need to set up the IEP meeting once they get that request. And that's how you can get the ball rolling and start with transition services.
So what if the student is now a senior in high school, and they or the parent says, we've never heard of transition services, and they want to graduate, they're going to graduate them in a month. What does the individual do?
The parents and the student, I mean, hopefully that doesn't happen that often, but I have seen it happen, so I know it happens. They need to try to, follow up on complimentary, try to make up for those services that they did not get in the short amount of time. Would have to start with an evaluation of the student. And then transition services, would be evaluated what could be available to that student at that time. We'd have to see what that student's needs were. The parents may even have to get a private evaluation. Even if the student graduates, the student can still pursue transition services to make up for the lost time. They can still pursue that. I believe they have up to 2 years to do so. They have a 2-year window from the day that they should have gotten those services. They could say that they didn't get appropriate services at the right time.
And what I would add to what Robert has just said, in terms of getting VR involved early, if that is at all possible. If the school district requests that the VR agency attend the IEP meeting and the VR agency declines that request, then the recommendation is to have the parent contact the VR agency and make that request directly. Because if the VR agency is then unwilling to attend the IEP meeting, then the recommendation is to contact Disability Rights New Jersey and let us take a look at that under the Client Assistance Program. Also, I see a question in the chat box, which is, what does it look like for students to participate in VR services while they are in school full-time? So really, in school, there are 2 sets of VR transition services that should be made available to students with disabilities. The first set of services are the pre-employment transition services. These can be provided in conjunction with the services that the student is receiving from the school. One of the 5 pre-employment transition services is instruction in self-advocacy. The school may be providing other services, but if the parent believes that their child would benefit from some additional self-advocacy training, then that would be a reason to speak with the school and ask them to help submit a referral to DVR for pre-employment transition services. So I mentioned submit a referral and I didn't say submit an application, because pre-employment transition services do not require a formal application to DVR for those services to be made available. However, for students who may need additional, more intensive employment preparation supports, the parents may want to consider applying to the VR agency for VR transition services. These are individualized services that really can include whatever the child needs in order to prepare them for their employment goal. It might be job coaching. It might be, if the child has a part-time job, it might be the provision of accommodations, assistive technology. The VR agency can also provide training, physical and mental restoration services, and assistive technology. And that's just a few of the many services that the VR agency potentially can provide students with disabilities. Now, of course, as Robert has emphasized, the school is primarily responsible. But as a result of WIOA, the VR agencies now can provide these individualized transition services to students while they are in school. And the additional benefit of parents applying for VR transition services while their child is in school is that the VR agencies will really get to know their child, so that prior to graduation, a post-graduation individualized plan for employment can be developed and can and should include all the services that the child will need once they graduate, whether that's college training, vocational training, or job coaching, supported employment, etc. Really, the purpose of WIOA was not to replace transition services provided by the school, but to close the gap that Robert mentioned at the start of this presentation, which resulted in students sitting at home with having nothing to do. So the advice is, if you think your child may need vocational rehabilitation services, either while they're in school or after school, consider applying as early as possible after the child reaches 14.
Yes. I want to mention before our time ends here that I did have one situation one time that VRS was to provide services to, fill the gap that the school could not provide. The student had an internship, but the school did not provide transportation to get to that internship. So we tried to get VRS to provide that transportation. So that filled the gap. But the school could do it, and then DVRS filled the gap so that student could achieve that goal. So like we've mentioned, try to get as much as you can from both places, from the school district and from DVRS, to give maximum benefit to that child. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. There's quite a few pieces, and we don't want to have any missing pieces. And, you know, if everyone does their part, we'll have all the pieces. There won't be anything missing. Go ahead, Susan.
Great. So we had, related to that, someone did ask a question, can VR pay for services the school is also providing, which kind of piggybacks on what Robert and Susan were just talking about.
ERP sense.
I think it's almost like an insurance policy. For example, the student may need assistive technology, and the school asks the parents, can your private insurance pay for it? And the parents say no. Then in that situation, the school district will have to provide the assistive technology. Or the school district could ask DVRS to pay for something. DVRS is not able to pay for everything, so sometimes if they're not able to pay for it, then the school district has the obligation to pay for those services. I feel that it doesn't matter who pays, as long as someone pays for it and the student gets the services.
And there was also a comment in, not a question, just says, it is also important, I'm sorry, it is so important that benefits advertisement be provided for SSI and SSDI beneficiaries too.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So we have a couple minutes to wrap up. If there are any other questions, comments, please, feel free to unmute yourself or put the question in the chat box. We can pick Robert and Susan's brains for a few more minutes.
Well, during this awkward silence, I'd like to let you know that I'll be doing a webinar next week, next Thursday. About the latest developments in special education. So I'll be doing that next week. So hopefully you'll sign up for that.
The registration went out yesterday, so hopefully everyone who registered for this summit will receive that link as well. So if they're interested, that registration went out yesterday.
Yeah, and I would just second what Denise said earlier on, that our new very pretty website now has a wealth of self-advocacy resources about special education, transition, just a lot of resources. So definitely, if you have time, check it out.
We also have a transition checklist there as well.
Right, right.
And it also speaks to what school districts provide. And, but you should be looking at the age of 14. And also what that you should be doing by the time the student is 16. And there's a checklist there that could help you with transition service processing. It's really important to be proactive because the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Yeah, and finally, I'm just going to make one more recommendation that if anybody has any difficulty seeking or receiving vocational rehabilitation services, think about our agency, because we have this designated federally funded program, and we will try and help you with any problems that you're having with receipt of VR services.
Thank you. We are over time right now. So thank you so much for everyone, your time today. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We have, like Susan said, a wealth of information on our website, and our Get Help intake form is on there. So please feel free to reach out, and we'll be happy to assist. So everyone, have a great afternoon.